What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Amy Nixon. Today is September 1st, 2022. Currently recording in my apartment at around 10:36 p.m. For episode 118. And joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. What's up?
Holy crap, everyone. What is up? Welcome back to episode 119 of the Raw Prospect Podcast. Hope everyone is doing well and is healthy. I, on the other hand, have had, it's not COVID, but it's some bacterial infection in my respiratory tract. So if you hear, I'm warning you in advance, if you hear a couple coughs here and there, that's what that is. I'm still recovering from that. I've had a cold the past week. It's really sucked. But I sat down tonight and I got to watch 2-3 hours of some college football, which was nice. And holy cow, if that Pittsburgh West Virginia game was any indication of how the college football season is going to go, we are in for something else. But today we are going to be talking about the NFC East. In fact, 1 week from tonight, at about this time, the first NFL regular season game will be ending. Bills-Rams. So that's exciting as well. So we got to really hustle up this next week and get this content in for you guys before the actual season starts. College football, that's this weekend, including tonight. And for NFL, that's next Thursday.
Yeah.
It's exciting stuff.
Let's get into this prospect of the week real quick. I'll give mine first. Lately, I've been, thinking a lot about my fantasy football season. That's been on my mind a lot in terms of sports. I haven't been able to watch much sports, but with fantasy, I've just been thinking about, what running backs I think could be overlooked in those first few rounds, especially in like a PPR league. A lot of people would normally go for wide receiver or, maybe a quarterback. But for me, I really like to look at some of these running backs. And the running back I chose today is Dalvin Cook. I just think he's someone that you need to be looking at, picking in the top 6. And that's not, consensus. That seems to be, Dalvin Cook seems to be picked, higher in round 2, maybe not mid round 1 for most leagues. But I really do think Dalvin Cook is going to have a extremely key part in the Vikings offense this year. I think they're going to implement him more in the passing game as well. That's one of the things that they haven't been able to unlock out of him that I think they still can, especially with their new system and bringing in Kevin O'Connell, or I think that's what his name is, their new head coach. But overall, I just think he's being overlooked right now. And, it's fair because, he's had his, injury struggles here and there. But he's going to be a extremely key fixture in that passing game. And that offensive line has improved as well. So don't overlook Dalvin Cook. If he's the best running back available, take him.
It's funny because I'm personally high on the Vikings this year. And that might come through in our predictions episode, which we're planning to record either this weekend or early next week. That'll be exciting. But someone I really respect, don't necessarily agree with everything he says, and Colin Cowherd is super high on the Vikings. Has them winning the NFC North this year. For some of the reasons I agree with, but for others are up for debate. I don't necessarily have the Vikings. I'm not that high on the Vikings, but I do think they're going to be a playoff team this year, and that's a little a little look into the future at our preseason predictions episode, which should be exciting. But for me, my prospect of the week, and hell, I don't even know if we talk a lot of tennis on this podcast, if at all, if we ever talk tennis on this podcast. But I sat down last night and I watched the U.S. Open, which is going on right now. It's one of the majors for tennis, and it's been on ESPN for the past couple of days. And I watched Serena Williams, who a couple weeks ago came out in a magazine article and announced her official but unofficial retirement from tennis. And she said she would be retiring after the U.S. Open, which is going on right now. And last night she beat the number 2 player in the world in the second round in 3 sets. And the last set was, there's something about like these older athletes, these older great athletes, like we've seen it a bunch of times with like Kobe in a 60-point game. We've seen it with Tiger winning the Masters. We've seen it in a bunch of different sports.
Brady.
There's something about the great ones when they're on like their, I don't want to say last leg, but that's technically what it is. And they like turn back the clock and show like what got them to this point. And that's what Serena did last night. And it was pretty fun to watch and pretty awesome to watch. And so, man, I hope she goes further. I hope she can, win tomorrow and keep going and make this one last ride, because she is truly, if you look at her resume, and I don't need to read off all the accolades, but 23 Grand Slam titles speak for itself. She is truly not only one of the greatest tennis players ever, but one of the greatest female athletes ever. So I think that speaks for itself.
Yeah, I think that was an obvious pick there. I didn't want to pick her because I didn't want to double dip. But I mean, I caught bits and pieces of that match yesterday. I watched the first 2 sets, and after she lost the second set, I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of like, I'm just gonna turn this off and go do homework. It's probably the end, But then next thing I know, I'm getting texts from a friend of mine on the tennis team, like Serena's turning it on right now, and then I turn it on and she's getting aces on her serves, and she's just being Serena.
Yeah.
And like you said, Serena is probably the most dominant player in a sport like that you can get. Like there's not much. There's really no one you can compare her dominance to when she was in her prime.
Right.
So, I mean, it sucks that she's retiring, but let's just hope that she continues this run through the U.S. Open.
For sure. All right, so that will do it for that segment, and we are on to the NFC East. So why don't you kick us off?
Yeah. We're going to continue our, I guess, tradition of starting from the bottom and moving our way up with the teams. So the first team would be the New York Giants. The outlook on this team right now is not great. They just hired a new head coach, new general manager, got some new blood in the building that was much needed. It seemed like the end of last year, that entire building just seemed lost and dejected. And that really was encapsulated by that infamous QB sneak on 3rd and 9 at their own 4-yard line, no less. But the hope is that Brian Dable can go in there and, work his magic with Daniel Jones and help develop him so that they can, see enough to keep Daniel Jones as the starter. That's the hope if you're a Giants fan. But the reality is, I just don't think this roster has enough. Um, if you look at skill position players, you look at the interior of each of their lines. I mean, you can look at any separate point of this roster you want to. I just really don't think um, there's a whole lot there, but we will break it down. Um, I'll go ahead and transition over to you. Are you as low on the Giants as I am? And is there a reason for a Giants fan to have hope going into this year?
Oh man, the New York Giants. Well, first off, we should start by excuse me. We should start by highlighting what they lost and what they gained this offseason.
Right.
Of course, you lose Joe Judge. Jason Garrett, the offensive coordinator, is out. Patrick Graham, the DC, is out. He's on to his next job. You lose a veteran offensive tackle, Nate Solder. Another offensive lineman in Will Hernandez. You lose Kyle Rudolph, your two veteran tight ends, and Kyle Rudolph and Evan Ingram. You lose a good cornerback in James Bradbury on that defense. You lose Logan Ryan, solid veteran safety, and some other pieces as well. And what you bring in, you of course hire the highly touted offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills and Brian Dable, who I think eventually give him a couple years. And I think this is the reason for hope here with the New York Giants. Give him a couple of years to figure this thing out, and this ship will start to steer in the right direction. I do like that hire. I think it's going to do good things for them. And I like their draft. Getting an athlete like Kayvon Thibodeau, who showed some good things in the preseason. Ultimately, you didn't like to see him get hurt, but I think that ended up being the best case scenario to where he's only going to be out for 3 or 4 weeks, and he'll be back and hopefully make an impact on this defense. Veteran linebacker like Blake Martinez, you bring him over, and you also get Evan Neal to supplement that offensive line, along with another solid tight end, Ricky Seals-Jones. So it was a good draft. I like what they did in the draft. They addressed the offensive line. They addressed the defense, the pass rush. This was a pass rush. I think I have the stat in front of me. They were tied for 23rd in sacks last year. So hopefully some of the guys that they brought in can help with that. For me, it all comes down to, and I think this is what it comes down to for everybody, is Daniel Jones. I think we're going to know. I haven't looked at their schedule yet, but I think we're going to know by about Thanksgiving whether Daniel Jones is it or not. And if he's not it, then they need to go in a different direction and rip the Band-Aid off this next offseason. So I don't know, man. I think there are some good things to be excited for. I think, Kenny Golladay playing up to his contract this year would be nice. I do like the weapons on this offense. Saquon Barkley staying healthy. Devontae Booker sort of spelling him in the run game. I like what they added on the offensive line. And I like some of these receivers. Kadarius Toney's a guy they drafted last year. Had about 39 catches for 420 yards last year. Maybe he steps up into a bigger role. But for me, they have some weapons. The offensive line hopefully improves. They have a new head coach, which is a sign for hope. And they have some young, exciting players on this defense. But ultimately, if you don't have a quarterback, you can't win in this league. And there are still major questions with Daniel Jones that need to be answered and fast. And if they're not, they need to move in a separate direction. And it feels like we've been on this rotating wheel, or whatever you want to call it, of quarterbacks with this franchise ever since Eli Manning retired. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think um, if Daniel Jones does show some things this year, that would be great because, as you said, this franchise needs stability. They need to, build towards something more than anything. Um,
Yeah.
so Daniel Jones is 100% on the clock. Um, it's now or never in terms of his career as a starter in the NFL. So it'll be interesting to watch. Looking at their draft, um, they, as you mentioned, Kayvon Thibodeau, but I just want to take a second to talk about Evan Neal as well. He was a guy who was, touted as the premier tackle prospect of this class. Um, they were able to get him at 7, which I think was absolutely a steal. Obviously, the whole, him or Ike Ekwonu debate was very prevalent in this draft, but my preference was definitely Evan Neal. So I thought that was a really good pick. And then Wandale Robinson is a
Yeah.
guy not a lot of people are talking about, but second round pick. I mean, he's a guy who's, you know, your kind of prototypical, slot receiver, but he's got legit speed. He ran a 4.440, and if he can, hone in his route running ability a little bit more, I think you have a real piece there because Dable really likes to lean into um, you know that deep passing game, and I think having a guy like Wandale Robinson, like a technician, a route runner, to offset that could really help this offense be a lot more efficient. But overall, I think it was mostly about drafting well and just clearing up as much money as possible. Like I think um, what went under the radar with the Giants this year is they were in such cap hell to where they couldn't even sign their rookies. They had to, you know, clear everything. They had to clean house.
Yeah. A couple more things we should mention here. Along the offensive line, and this actually plays into the conversation with Daniel Jones, because if he's going to have the success that not only the Giants need him to have, but also he needs to have in order to stay a starting quarterback in this league, he needs to be protected. And that starts up front. And I do like, now that I'm looking at their full roster, some of the moves that they made through free agency. They're not flashy names, but they bring in a guy like Mark Glowinski, I believe is how you say it, uh, from Indianapolis, and John Feliciano, a veteran center out of the University of Miami, who should help stabilize this interior offensive line. So, and then you obviously have Andrew Thomas, who you drafted a couple years ago. I think it was 3 years ago out of Georgia. So you hope to see him develop even more. So you have Evan Neal, Andrew Thomas, and these new veteran pieces along the offensive line. Hopefully, we see the progression of this offensive line because that will help Daniel Jones. If he gets the proper protection that he needs, well, you have Saquon Barkley, you have Kenny Galladay when he's on the field, I should say, and then a guy like Wandale Robinson and Kadarius Toney uh, can provide that more explosive down the field component to this offense. But if Brian Dable, is going to emphasize Daniel Jones' blend of, pocket presence and athleticism and sort of blend them together, and we can talk about all the issues he has there. It's all going to start with the offensive line because they have weapons. It's not for lack of weapons on this team. So the offensive line, the quarterback, sort of like the Steelers in a way, but not. The Steelers situation, I don't think, is this dire. And then on defense, I mean, their defense has been solid. They could use a little bit more of a punch in terms of a pass rush, as far as a pass rushing is concerned. You obviously like Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams, and then you get Kayvon Thibodeau. I'm interested to see their young linebacker who they drafted last year out of Georgia, Azeez Ojulari. He had some potential, but I haven't seen much from him yet. So hopefully he increases his production. And I'm just saying I haven't seen much from him. I didn't watch the Giants much last year. But yeah, him and Kayvon Thibodeau, definitely some youth in that linebacking core. And then losing what's his name? Damn, I'm blanking on his name. James Bradbury in the secondary. It's not great, but I do like that they brought in Wink Martindale, the longtime defensive coordinator in Baltimore. They brought him over to be their defensive coordinator in place of Patrick Graham. So not a bad replacement there. So hopefully he can figure things out. He's a veteran. He's been in this league a long, long time. So hopefully this defense can be solid and keep this team in some games. But hopefully they're a team that, I'm going to start to peek at their schedule, and I'll hand the floor over to you. Hopefully this is a team that if they struggle early, we at least see the progression of like the Giants by like week 13, 14, as the season comes down the home stretch, they're becoming a coach. You can see that they're a well coached. They play hard. They do all the little things right, sort of like the Detroit Lions did last year. You can sort of see that progression as the season moves into the latter stages if they're not winning games. And I think that's probably what Giants fans should hope for if the team is struggling.
Right, exactly. Yeah, let's take a look at their schedule really quick, and then we can move on. Their schedule in the middle, from what I can remember, was pretty favorable. Although they do have a tough stretch near the end of the season with a lot of divisional games, a lot of important divisional games, depending on where they're sitting at, all back to back. Weeks 12 through 15, you have Dallas, Washington, Philly, Washington, and then Philly again, week 18. So a lot of their divisional games are near the end. And I don't think the schedule is particularly hard. I don't think, but there's not a lot of games where I look at and say, okay, their roster can do some things here. There's not a lot of games like that either. But I do think they definitely lucked out with their bye week. They got it right in the middle at week 9.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I look at that stretch right in the middle of their season, sort of the middle of October, right before their bye week. You have Green Bay. You got to travel to London for that game. But, excuse me. And then you have Baltimore, which isn't great. But then you have 2 winnable games before your bye week, at Jacksonville and at Seattle. Now, granted, those games are on the road and they're not going to be easy. Jacksonville should be improved. In Seattle, well, playing in Seattle is never easy. I don't care what anyone says. But those games, like this Giants team, with the talent that they have on offense, if Daniel Jones plays well in those games, they could win those games. Like, it's not out of the question. And then you come out of the bye week and you have 2 more winnable games. This time, they're at home. So you get a week to prepare. Maybe you're feeling good coming off a victory or two out of that bye week. You're carrying some momentum, and you can, November football, right in the smack dab middle of November football, you can win a couple games in November. And maybe this team gets confidence going into those divisional games down the stretch. Who knows? This is the NFL. We don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be tough. You look at their schedule, starting with that November 24th game, the week of Thanksgiving at Dallas, and then Washington, Philadelphia. 4 straight divisional games at Dallas, Washington, Philadelphia, and then at Washington again. And then at Minnesota on a short week on a Saturday night, Christmas Eve, before you play Indianapolis and go to Philadelphia to finish the season. So, yeah, that's brutal. But that little stretch right in the middle, right before their bye week and right after their bye week, is where I think you could see the Giants rack up some victories, if you will. And then who knows? Early in the season, we always see some weird, excuse my language, we always see some weird shit go on in week 1. There's always an upset that we don't necessarily expect. So who knows? Maybe they sneak up on one of these teams early on. But I don't know. I don't expect much, but I just want to see, number one, whether or not Daniel Jones can be the starting quarterback for this team moving forward. That's the obvious question that everyone has. And then number 2, what I said earlier, the progression of the football team as they move forward into the season, what they look like even if they're losing games. Are they playing hard? Are they a well-coached football team? That sort of thing. So, that's the Giants for me.
Yeah. We spent about 20 minutes on the New York Giants there. That's interesting. But moving along here to a team who was bullied into a rebrand, the Washington Commanders. Commanders are coming off a 7-10 season, finished 3rd in the division, and made a change at quarterback, notably trading for Carson Wentz from the Indianapolis Colts. I think giving up a 3rd-round pick in the process, I believe. But where are you at on the Commanders? That still feels weird to say. Where are you at on the Commanders, the commies, if you will? And how would you feel about their offseason?
Well, the first thing that pops in my head is, what is this team's over or under in Vegas? I'm curious to know, but maybe we can look at that a little later.
I think it's 7.5, but I would have to double check.
My Sports Illustrated here says 7.5, so you might be right. They won 7 games last year. They're still under the direction of head coach Ron Rivera. They get a new quarterback. His name is Carson Wentz. Obviously, the career of Carson Wentz to this point has been quite the journey. The question is, what are we going to get? Which Carson Wentz are we going to get? Not only this year, but on a week-to-week basis. We saw last year. If you look at his overall numbers, they actually aren't all that bad. In fact, they're pretty good. But if you watch the actual games, it was a different story game to game, quarter to quarter. And I think the main thing with Carson Wentz is he's reckless. He can be reckless. It's just his nature. I don't know if anybody can really coach it out of him. It's just what he is as a quarterback. He's going to wow you sometimes, and other times you're going to be like, what the hell? What was that? That sort of thing. That's just the vibe I get from Carson Wentz watching him. I think he can be fantastic sometimes, other times not. So what are you getting on a week-to-week basis from your quarterback? And that sounds like not such a great question to be asking if you're looking to win in today's NFL. But you know that if Carson Wentz plays good or his best, that he's going to elevate this team with some of the weapons that they have, some of the weapons that they drafted, and they can win some football games, especially with this defense. So that's sort of how I'm feeling. He's going to have some really good Sundays, I bet, and there are going to be some Sundays that don't look so great. But the question is going to be, if it's not great, then how bad is it really? Because the last time we saw Carson Wentz, it was that game against Jacksonville in Week 18 of last year, and it wasn't all that great. It was bad. The owner or the GM over there is still not happy about it. Blanking on his name right now. Jim Irsay, still not happy about that. Yeah, that's the quarterback story. But he is an upgrade over what they've had. And I have a ton of respect for Taylor Heineke and what he was able to do. But Carson Wentz is an upgrade talent-wise, arm-wise, just overall as a quarterback. So I applaud the aggressiveness of the Washington front office in going out and trying to upgrade the position. I like the weapons that they have. Terry McLaurin obviously got paid this offseason, I believe. And you draft, you bring in Curtis Samuel, a nice slot guy that they can use, and then you draft Jahan Dotson out of Penn State, the guy that I really like, who can stretch the field, make splash plays for you. I think will be a really good fit in this offense, especially with a guy like Carson Wentz who wants to air the ball out deep. What else did they do this offseason? They bring in Logan Thomas as a veteran tight end. They bring in Trey Turner, who was spent all last year with Pittsburgh, veteran guard, to give them some depth along the offensive line. Obviously, you look at this offensive line right now, it's not terrible, but it's not – when I think about today's NFL and I think of the best offensive lines, Washington doesn't pop up at the top of that list, but I don't think it's an area where it's not going to kill them.
Right.
And then defensively, you obviously love the front seven: Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, Montez Sweat, and Chase Young. Questions at linebacker for sure. Jamin Davis is a guy they drafted a couple years ago out of Kentucky. Super athletic. Drafted, I believe, in the first round. And I'm not sure what he's looked like so far, but it'd be nice to see a progression from him and his development. And then the secondary. I'm not sure if they lost any talent in the secondary. They did lose Landon Collins, and I should mention they did lose their veteran guard, Brandon Scherf, on the offensive line. That was a big miss. So they did lose some veteran pieces, but look, they added Adam Humphries as well in that receiving core. Matt Ioannidis on the interior of that defensive line, which should beef that up, give it some depth. There's not necessarily a move that I hated this offseason for the Washington Commanders or Washington football team, whatever you want to call them. For me, it just comes down to Carson Wentz and what we get on a week-to-week basis. But, hey, I do think this team, you look at what their over-under is according to Sports Illustrated. You mentioned it earlier, 7.5. If Carson Wentz plays well in this division, which isn't the hardest of divisions, let's be honest, they can win some games. I haven't looked at their schedule yet, but I could see them around 8 wins for sure. They won 7 last year. And there's an argument to be made with the upgrade at quarterback talent-wise, some of the weapons that they brought in, and their defense, especially that defensive front. They could win 8 or 9 games. It's not out of the question. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the question for me with Washington is, does winning 8 or 9 games make the Carson Wentz trade worth it?
That's
Obviously,
fair.
it helps to bring in a quarterback, even if it's short term. Bringing in a quarterback who is, you know, when he's on is a top 20-ish guy. That has value, 100%. But you know, if things don't go to plan, and let's just say this team misses the playoffs, then what? Then you're kind of left with nothing. I mean, giving up, a third round pick, it's not too steep of a cost, but I just question the direction of this franchise. I think drafting a quarterback, obviously this wasn't a great quarterback class, but I think drafting someone and, investing in him would have been way more beneficial in my opinion. And obviously they do have Sam Howell, but I'm just not bought in with this team. As good as that defensive line is, I still have a lot of questions about the other parts of their roster.
Yeah, that's completely fair. And I'm not necessarily predicting that they will win that many games, but it is a possibility. So let's look at their schedule. They didn't really do a whole lot. They weren't all that active this offseason, aside from the Carson Wentz deal and a couple other moves in the draft, obviously. So if you look at their schedule, they do get a little bit of a break right off the bat. Jacksonville is their week 1 matchup at home, and then at Detroit. Even though we expect better things from Detroit, improvement from Detroit this year, that's a winnable game. It's not like a game that they cannot win. So if they play well in those 2 games, they could start off 2-0, and then you go into a little bit, excuse me, tougher of a stretch. Philly at Dallas, Tennessee. You get Chicago on the road on a short week, and then Green Bay at Indianapolis, Minnesota at Philadelphia. See, that stretch right there is brutal. But going into the bye week, sort of like we saw with the Giants, it eases up a little bit. And then after the bye week, it's their bye week being in week 13, week 14. They really got screwed over there. But if you look at the 3 games prior, at Houston, Atlanta, and the Giants, those are games that they could definitely, I could see them winning. Then after the bye week, playing the Giants again. So maybe they get some momentum going down the stretch. But that brutal stretch from like week 3 to about week 10, week 11-ish, is what's really going to define this team's season.
Yeah, exactly. Um, I really don't have much to say about this team. So if
Yeah.
unless you have anything else to say, I'd say let's go ahead and move on.
Let's move on. And why don't you start us off with the Eagles?
Yeah, the Eagles are a team I'm not going to say excited about since I'm a Cowboys fan, but I have high hopes for this Eagles team. I like a lot of the players on their roster. I really like Jalen Hurts. I really like the leadership that he brings to the table. I think, the moves that they made in the offseason speak for themselves. Obviously, bringing in A.J. Brown, obviously, um, bolstering up that defensive line with the addition of Jordan Davis, um, drafting Cameron Jurgens, drafting Nakobe Dean. I just think they hit so many home runs this offseason. And they also just traded for the nickel from the Saints, who
Yeah.
is very underrated, C.J. Gardner-Johnson.
Yep.
So they're still making moves, and uh, this team is stacked. The only question really comes down to the quarterback, and even then, I really do think um, Jalen Hurts has proven enough to where um, he won't hold the team back too much. I mean, even with Jalen Hurts' deficiencies last year, the Eagles still made the playoffs. So I expect them to build on that this year.
Yeah, I really like what this team did this offseason. I think a lot of people do. Um, you know, getting a guy like Hassan Reddick in free agency to pair with some of the young linebacker talent that they just drafted, and a guy like Nakobe Dean, who was arguably the best inside linebacker in the draft. Some people would argue that. Uh, Getting Jordan Davis, that big monster on the interior of your defensive line. We already know what they have on that defensive line. And Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham and Javon Hargrave. But getting Jordan Davis, who's basically a plug and play guy, high upside. I don't know, what was he? 6'6, 340, 350, can move. He's athletic, just going to be an absolute nightmare to deal with, both, I think, in the run game, especially, but also in the pass game with his athleticism and what he can do. Playing off of guys like Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham, like I just mentioned, getting a guy like Hassan Reddick, Nakobe Dean, who can do a little bit of everything. And then, you know, getting a guy like Kaiser White as well. They brought him over from the Chargers. He's a nice linebacker who can provide some different things and is athletic himself. So they got really athletic in this linebacking core, which I think they needed. And they injected some youth up front. And you look at this defense, it's kind of turning into – you look at this team in general, it's kind of turning into like the SEC in a way, SEC Northeast in a way, in that you get Jordan Davis from Georgia. You bring in A.J. Brown, who played his college ball at Ole Miss. You have Jalen Hurts, who played at Bama. I mean, I could go on and on. But, yeah, Kobe Dean, who's also part of that historic Georgia defense. I really like what this team is doing. And the one thing that they're really doing is they're building an identity under this new head coach. What was his name again? God.
Nick Sirianni.
Nick Sirianni, yes, indeed. And a great first year for Nick Sirianni. That was one of the things I was wrong about last year. I was not high on this Eagles team going into last year, but this season I'm singing a different tune. So on the offensive side, you get some weapons. Zach Pascal, productive receiver in his days in Indianapolis. A.J. Brown, we know what he can do when he stays healthy and is on the field. And then, you have your stable of running backs, and the offensive line is good. So, yeah, this Eagles team, it's a well-built roster. You know what their identity is going to be. They're going to be built from the inside out. There still are questions with Jalen Hurts, but as Imy said, we saw that Jalen Hurts is a guy that, number one, you can win in the regular season with. He's a good leader, and he's been through a little bit of everything. He's played on the biggest stages. He's gotten a taste of the playoffs now. So if they get back there and we see the continued growth and development of him throughout the regular season, this team could be dangerous. So, yeah, we'll see how Nick Sirianni follows it up.
Yeah. It should be extremely interesting. This battle between the Eagles and the Cowboys this year. I'm hopeful that it'll be, as competitive as it should be, but we'll see. Um, One last thing I'll say about the Eagles, one last thing to add is just let's just look at the schedule really fast.
Yeah.
I it's just loading really quick.
So the
Okay,
schedule,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So they start out at Detroit, then Minnesota at home, on the road at Washington in week 3, then Jacksonville, then Arizona, then Dallas. Then they have their bye week, week 7. So those first 6 weeks, I'd say, you know, there's a good chance, you know, they start 2-1. Um, that obviously divisional games are, you know, they can be a little dicey, especially since we don't know what Carson Wentz we're going to get week to week. But that to start out that schedule, I think is pretty light. I think to be fair, and then coming out of the bye week, you have Pittsburgh at home, then you go to Houston, then you play Washington at home. So 3 decently winnable games there. Um, we don't know what we don't know who Pittsburgh will have at quarterback by that point in week 8. So that'll be interesting as well. Um, and then it kind of tightens up a little bit. Then you have Indy, who I'm pretty high on, Green Bay, and then Tennessee, who I think Tennessee might have a top 5 defense this year with that front 7, and then the Giants, who we just talked about, that's a winnable game as well. Chicago, super winnable. Then you have Dallas and New Orleans. Um, I think New Orleans might be an interesting one. They do get them at home, which helps. The Superdome is not an easy place to play ever. Um, and then they close the year against the Giants at home. So a decently easy schedule. I mean, you never say it's easy because it's still the NFL. You can lose any game any given week. We've seen it too many times. Um, so I think realistically, this team should be shooting for 10 wins. I
Yeah.
think that's fair. I think they have a bunch of winnable games on this schedule, and I think if they steal a couple here and there, if they split against Dallas, if they maybe steal one of those games that's kind of like a tweener game that you could go either way. Maybe that game against Arizona or um, maybe even sweeping Washington, little things like that they can do to bolster up their record. I think could really put this team in the picture for those higher seeds.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, and the thing that stands out to me about their schedule is, aside from a couple games, they get most of their what you would call their tougher games at home. If you look at their schedule, obviously we know you play each of your divisional foes twice, once on the road and once at home. So you're going to get Dallas at home once, you're going to get Washington at home, and you're going to get the Giants at home. So maybe a goal for them should be, winning 2 out of 3 of those games, defending your home field. But if you look outside the division, Minnesota, I classify that as a not so easy game. That's going to be a tough one. They get that game at home, though. Aside from at Arizona on October 9th, and I believe it's at Indianapolis on November 20th, you get Dallas at home, you get Pittsburgh at home, you get Green Bay at home, you get Tennessee at home, you get New Orleans at home. So a lot of these tougher games are at home in Philadelphia, and I think that needs to be, how they perform at home this year will be critical to their success, crucial to their success, whatever word you want to use.
Right, exactly. The division games are going to be massive.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think if this defense is as good as we think it's going to be, I think this team has a chance to really make some noise. And that sucks to say as a Cowboys fan, but I mean, I can't deny how talented this team is. Their team is absolutely stacked. But with that, I think we'll move on to my Cowboys, unless you have anything to add.
No, let's move on.
All right, yeah. We're closing off the NFC East with the Dallas Cowboys, my favorite team. The team that had their ups and downs this offseason. Um, a lot of people questioned that first round pick, Tyler Smith, who at the moment looks to be the starter at left tackle week 1 with the Tyron Smith injury. So that's a question mark for sure. And then I think a lot of the depth corners of the roster is where you really lose out a little bit. Um, with the cap situation, losing players like Cedric Wilson, losing players like Connor Williams, even though I wasn't crazy high on Connor last year, he was still a decent left guard, and at the very least, he's a depth piece at left guard as well. Um, so I'm not too happy about the way the offseason went, but at the time there are a lot of young players on the roster, and those young players are able to show that development that the Cowboys are hoping for. Um, they should be able to, maintain their position as a 10-win team. I think that's similar to the Eagles. I think that should be where the Cowboys should be shooting for. Um, I'm gonna try not to ramble too much since this is my team. I'm gonna go ahead and transition over to you. What do you think of the Cowboys right now? What do you think their roster? And what's your overall take on it?
Well, the good thing for the Cowboys is they don't really have that huge question hanging over the franchise at the quarterback position. You have Dak Prescott. You know what you're going to get week in, week out from Dak Prescott. Say what you want about him here and there, but you know what you're going to get from Dak Prescott most of the time, right? And you look within your division, we know Jalen Hurts has done some good things, but we still got to see it. Some more. Carson Wentz, as we talked about at expense earlier, we don't know what we're going to get week to week sometimes with him. And then obviously with the Giants, their whole mess with Daniel Jones. So I do think that's an advantage. You have an advantage in that you have Dak Prescott, and the other teams in your division do not have Dak Prescott. Now, Mike McCarthy. Some people love him, some people hate him. I'd say I'm somewhere in between. But look, he's won a Super Bowl. Maybe last year was just, some things went wrong here and there. I don't know. But if they don't win, he could be in some trouble. But we'll see. That's still to be determined. I think this team is good enough to win games, especially in this division, and possibly even win the division. I think their really only real competitor is the Eagles. Now, their big losses in the offseason. Obviously, you don't like losing a lot of these guys, but if some of these younger players step up, we might look back halfway through the season and say, oh, well, we lost that guy, but does it really matter that much? Or did it really matter that much? I do think losing Amari Cooper is going to take some adjusting to. That's, I think, the biggest one, I'd say. Cedric Wilson, you hate to lose a guy like that, the third or fourth guy, really productive when he was on the field and really reliable. But with the way the Cowboys generally are pretty good in drafting those skilled positions, I don't necessarily worry about that too much. And then Lael Collins, obviously a veteran offensive tackle. You lose him. And then on the defensive side of the ball, losing Randy Gregory and losing DeMonte Casey, who's now in Pittsburgh and just suffered an injury that's going to keep him out for 4 to 6 weeks, but has been very productive in the preseason for the Steelers and should serve as some safety depth. So you don't like losing a lot of those guys. You mentioned Connor Williams as well. But I think there is a world in which, as you mentioned, some of these younger players step up, play their roles, and this Cowboys team's still super talented and can win games. So, look, on the defensive side of the ball, you have DeMarcus Lawrence. You have Micah Parsons, who's going to be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate year in, year out, as long as he's healthy. You have Trayvon Diggs. You have a playmaker at every level on your defense, just like a lot of the top defenses that win Super Bowls do. You have a veteran head coach. You have a veteran quarterback. And you still have the pieces that it takes. Tony Pollard's a guy I really like. If it were me, I would start him over Zeke, but that's just me. Maybe it was time to get you younger on the offensive line. Maybe that benefits this team. Who knows? I don't know. I still think what's their over-under? It's 10.5, according to Sports Illustrated. I think that's doable. You play in an easy-ish division, and you look at their schedule. It's not favorable the first 2 weeks, but after the first 2 weeks, the Giants, Washington, you can win both those games. Now the Rams in LA, that might be a tough one, but Philly, Detroit, Chicago. After the bye week, their schedule sort of goes in and out. There's the ebbs and flows of their schedule. Some easy games here, some harder games there. But that's just the nature of the NFL. And I think if you can win the games that you're supposed to, beat up on your division, you'll find yourself in the playoffs, just like you were last year. So I've heard a lot of pessimism, and I guess rightfully so, about the Cowboys this year and how their offseason went and this and that. But I still think some of the people out there talking are overreacting just a little bit. This is still a super talented team, and within this division can definitely win the division and get to the playoffs, if not win the division.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I think the overreaction is fair to an extent, but I also think
Yeah,
they're underrating the development of the young guys. I mean, we haven't even mentioned Micah Parsons yet, who had a insanely good rookie year at the linebacker spot. He can play in coverage. He can rush the passer with the best of them, with the absolute best of the best as well. There's just so many different questions you could really point to on this roster, but we really won't know until they get on the field. That's really the bottom line. I'm hopeful that the offensive line can be stable enough, especially with the loss of Lyle Collins, as you mentioned. Um, that's the hope that they're stable enough, but I'm not too you know too optimistic, considering we are starting the rookie at left tackle. So we'll see what happens. I think my outlook right now on the Cowboys is, I'm hesitantly optimistic. That's where I'm at.
yeah, I think I'm around the same place you are. But with that being said, if there's nothing else to be said, um, that's our NFC East preview, if you will. We'll be back, of course, with our predictions episode later this week or next week, early next week. But we're about an hour in here, and we should transition to our final segment. A big trade went down today in the NBA. So I'll let you kick us off here.
Yeah. The um, Cavs out and traded for Donovan Mitchell from the Utah Jazz, trading Laurie Markkinen, Colin Sexton, who was just extended by the Jazz subsequently after. Laurie Markkinen, Colin Sexton, and Ochai Agbaji, as well as 3 unprotected first round picks and 2 pick swaps. Um, this move, I'll go ahead and give my opinion, and then I'll switch it over to you after. My initial thought was, wow, this team is young and incredible. Um, Obviously, a lot of people's first thought was, "Oh, what is it going to be defensively in the backcourt?" My first thought was, "What is it going to look like in this, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, pick and pop, or Jared Allen, Donovan Mitchell pick and roll?" I think it's going to be incredible. I mean, whoever throw in at that 3 spot, as long as they can shoot a little bit, I mean, you can, you know, place in any 3 and D wing in the whole league that you want in that spot, and that lineup would be elite. And I don't say that lightly. I mean elite in terms of championship level elite. In terms of that one lineup at least. Um, but to add on to it, I just think Donovan Mitchell in the role that he will be put in with the Cavs, um, under JB Bickerstaff, with the defensive culture that the Cavaliers established last year. Um, I expect him to be a pretty decent defender. I expect him to get back to being a decent defender. I think the I think it's fair to say the offensive load that he had to take on with the Jazz last year started to get to him, and it started to show itself with some of his lapses defensively. But you know, now that he's in a new place where he can be refreshed and have a new start, I mean, he has all the tools to be a great defender. He has a 6'11" wingspan. I mean, you can say all you want about him being undersized, but um, when he came into the league, his defense was one of his strengths, believe it or not. So I think he will get back to that. And I think ultimately there isn't really many negatives you can point to from the Cavs' perspective because you have 4 guys who either were All Stars last year or will be future All Stars for sure. Um, and you have them under contract for years to come. I mean, what more could you want?
Yeah. Look, Laurie Markkinen, Colin Sexton, Ochai Agbaji, who I raved about when he was at Kansas. 3 unprotected first-round picks, which is a lot, but that's what it takes to get a player like Donovan Mitchell in 2 pick swaps. This is what it takes to make moves at this level if you want to compete to win a championship in today's NBA. You got to have stars. Donovan Mitchell is a star. They were, in a way, desperate for the. Let's put it this way. Their problem last year was it's hard to fake it. Like when you don't have that guy offensively in today's NBA, and they had Darius Garland, but they needed more twitch, more. I don't know how to say it. They needed a living, breathing bucket, if you will. And I think Donovan Mitchell's that. This is what they needed. They needed a punch offensively, an extra guy offensively, and they got that. And look, Mitchell, say what you want about him defensively, but I think he benefited in a way from what he had in Utah with Rudy Gobert and what he had defensively. And I think he's going to get that same thing, if not better, with what he has now in Cleveland. This was one of the best defensive teams in the league last year. And this front court is nasty with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen and so forth. So I think he's going to still benefit from the kind of defensive support He enjoyed playing alongside in Utah, and he's going to give the extra punch offensively that the Jazz need in terms of shot creation and shot making. Um, the real, or not the Jazz, the Cavs. The real question now with the Cavs is, you made the God, I can't. Karis LeVert trade during last season, and due to some different factors, timing, injury, and the peculiarities, the weirdness of Karis LeVert's game, I don't think he ever really got to fully settle in to this offense. So if he can give you something and if he can stay healthy, well, now you're really talking about something. But I think that wing position in particular is something that I still have questions about with the Cavaliers team. But look, they're well coached. They're going to be great defensively. And now you have this backcourt with Darius Garland, who's probably only going to get better now that he's playing alongside Donovan Mitchell. The question now becomes, where do they stack up in the East? Of course, we won't really know anything until we actually see this product play out in the court. But, I mean, Miami, Philly, Milwaukee, Boston, those teams all made moves this offseason as well, and most of them got better. So where do they stack up in the East? That's the question that I'm now asking myself.
Yeah. This trade, it really caught me off guard, man. In my head, it was, the Knicks and, maybe a couple other teams, but the Cavs really didn't pop in my head. And I may have mentioned them on the pod beforehand as a possible dark horse team, but I never even considered them as a contender in terms of the acquisition of Donovan Mitchell. But here we are, and they ended up not having to give up too much to get Donovan Mitchell. I think it was a good package, but it also wasn't a package that you feel bad giving up if you're the Cavs. You look at Colin Sexton; he's a guy you weren't committed to either way. You were going to let him go for nothing. And then Ochai Agbaji, you just drafted him. Obviously, you probably had hopes for what he could be as your 3-and-D wing, but I mean, if you have to sacrifice something, he'd probably be the first guy you go to since you just drafted him. And then, of course, Lauri Markkanen, who played better than a lot of people expected last year with their 3 big lineup, but at the same time, he was expendable as well. He's a young player who, definitely has room for improvement and has shown signs before. But I think the trade ends up being 100% worth it if you look at it like that, because you really weren't tied to any of these dudes long term, realistically.
Right. So what do you think of that package from a Utah perspective?
Well, for Utah, this is only the beginning. I think you can kind of factor in the Rudy Gobert package into it as well, because if you combine the two, Utah has acquired 13 unprotected or slightly protected first-round picks before the year 2027, I believe. So
Wow.
13 first-rounders. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot. And it's only the beginning, because you still can trade Jordan Clarkson, Bogdan Bogdanovic. I'm not sure what you could get on the open market for Mike Conley, but he's an expiring as well. You already traded Royce O'Neal. You got a first for him. So there's a lot of guys on that roster that could get a lot of value in return. I think one guy in particular that might be getting overlooked is Bogdanovich. He's a guy who, I mean, I think he averaged 16 a game the last couple years on good efficiency, can defend, um, can shoot the cover off of the ball. I mean, he is a ideal role player, and he's a veteran as well. Not a lot of times where you see a guy like that go on the market. So I'll be interested to see what they get back for him. But I can't really give the Jazz a grade yet because,
Yeah.
like I said, this is only the beginning.
Yeah, but I think if you look at the raw deal and what they got back, I do like some of the pieces they got back. I mean, Colin Sexton, the last time we saw him on a court, he's a good player. Same
Yep.
thing with Lauri Markkanen, as long as he stays healthy. And I was raving about Ochai Agbaji. I think the 3-and-D wing, as you mentioned, that he could potentially turn into as an NBA player could be a really beneficial piece to have. I mean, 3-and-D wings they're hot commodity in today's NBA, so
Right.
you can't have enough of them. And then obviously all these draft picks. I mean, if Danny Ainge has any questions about having all these stockpiling all these draft picks and how to handle all that, he can just go over and ask his fellow Western Conference GM Sam Presti about all that in Oklahoma City. So yeah, I mean, was there a better package out there? That's something I'm interested to know from a Jazz perspective. But also, I guess, getting him out of the Western Conference is a good thing for the Jazz. So, yeah, I mean, I think there are things to like from both sides. I love it from the Cleveland perspective, obviously. My only question is, I know it makes them a better team and a dangerous team, but where are they going to stack up in the West? What's it going to take to make this trade worth it? That sort of thing. But that's all preseason preview fodder that we can have down the road. And then from a Utah perspective, if you're going to tear it down completely. And that's what I think they're going to do. And Danny Ainge has done it before. So we'll see how it goes. But it was nice to get, after a crazy wave of NBA offseason moves right at the start of free agency for about a week, then we got that dead period. It was nice to get some bigger news from an NBA perspective as we start to turn our focus towards football before we start to transition back to basketball here in about 3-4 weeks.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, this trade was well overdue. I think the anticipation, the buildup of all the Donovan Mitchell trade rumors. I think a lot of people were starting to get kind of tired of it. So I'm glad that some team was able to pull the trigger. But one thing you mentioned earlier that I wanted to touch on was you were asking about what were the other offers that they were offered. Apparently, it was reported by Woj earlier. Knicks offered R.J. Barrett, Obi Toppin, Mitchell Robinson, and 3 unprotected first-round picks.
Ooh.
Yeah. But
See,
they couldn't do that deal because they just had signed R.J. Barrett, and he can't get traded until January now because it's a 6-month dead period. So once that extension went down with Barrett, it got cut off.
that's interesting. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I would have liked that package probably better than the one that they got for sure. But given that information, it makes sense that deal didn't go down. And, I'm also interested to see if there are other not reported deals that maybe come out later that were offered for the services of Donovan Mitchell. Because there's always, when one of these big trades goes down, there's always the the reports that come out later, a couple of weeks or a week afterwards, that show the packages that were offered and all that stuff. That should be interesting to see. Hour 15 minutes in here. I think we covered pretty much all of it, and we'll be talking so much more about this once the season comes closer. But one other thing I wanted to mention before we wrap this thing up, and it sucks. I hate to end the podcast on a not so great topic, but Chet Holmgren suffering a foot injury in a. Do you know what it was? It was some sort of scrimmage or.
Yeah, it was. They have their like Drew League like summer runs. It wasn't Drew League specifically, but it was one of those like little charity leagues. And I believe LeBron was playing in it as well, and that's kind of how it happened. LeBron was going down the lane. Chet didn't get out of the way, and he fell awkwardly on that ankle.
Yeah, I think it was a Liz Frank injury. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know too much about it, but the Thunder have already ruled him out for the entire upcoming season, which sucks because this is a guy that not only were we excited to watch play, but some people had high hopes for him. And hopefully he gets healthy and can come back sooner rather than later. But I thought it was interesting. And again, I'm not a doctor. I don't know these things, but that they already ruled him out for the season. Because if you look at the calendar, the season runs all the way until April. So I don't know the timeline for the injury. I don't know a lot of those things, but I don't know. Maybe it's that serious. I don't know. But maybe, leave the door open a little bit. Say he's out indefinitely. I don't know. I thought that was interesting. Maybe they're just playing it safe.
Yeah, one thing I'll add on to that is, based on the reports, it's said to be very similar to the injury Zion had. Okay. So the process is extremely slow with that type of injury. And on top of that as well, he's a guy who's over 7 feet tall. Yeah. And we know the history of these things with, 7-foot players who are high draft picks. Once those lower body injuries start, it's hard to stop them. We saw, a foot injury like this end Yao Ming's career. So it's well documented. I think ruling him out for the season with the right move. It sucks, but they got to think about the future. So they can't risk making it worse or re-injuring it in some shape or form.
Certainly. So when it initially happened, those were my thoughts. But now looking back on it, obviously we understand why it happened. And I think it's a thing that those sort of things, some of these things can be freak things that just happen sort of unexpectedly. So if this was going to happen, it was going to happen, if you know what I mean. Whether it was in that particular game or scrimmage or whatever you want to call it, or at the start of the season or in training camp. If this was going to happen, it was going to happen, and it sucks. But hopefully, all we can say is really hopefully he comes back healthy. And I think this might be, in some ways, a blessing in disguise, a time he can take to sort of further develop his game and put on some weight if possible. Sort of fill out before you actually play in the NBA. So, I don't know. Best wishes to Chet Holmgren. Still a lot of exciting pieces that we get to watch in Oklahoma City. But we'll talk about that another day. But I think that's going to wrap it up for today's podcast.
Yeah, that'll be it for episode 118, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a 5-star rating and review on Spotify, Apple, wherever you're listening. And with that, I'll just let Michael do his signature sign off.
Yeah, so everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to go check out all of our other fantastic content, all of our divisional previews that have been put up so far and will be put up here in the next week or so, and everything else that we're working on our Patreon too. Be on the lookout for a Patreon podcast coming soon. And some of the bracket stuff that we've been doing as well. I know that NBA bracket that we did is going to be released soon as well. So like, subscribe to the channel, do all that thing, do all those sort of things that will help the channel. We greatly appreciate it. But with all that being said, just like the chances of not having regular season football, college or pro, for the next, 5.5 months, we are gone. Peace out.
Peace out.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to click on one of these two videos right here, our latest video right here on the left, or the video YouTube recommends for you on the right.